There is a book, a bestseller in South Korea for the past 35 weeks, written by two Japanese authors called Courage to be Unloved, or originally Courage to be Hated. And I prefer my former title. Quite unlike the title of the book, it covers the theories of psychotherapist Alfred Adler, former Jewish, converted into Christianity later. This book is made up of conversations between the young man and the philosopher, where the philosopher acts as his mentor. The philosopher says the following: Adler's psychology is the psychology of courage. The reason you are miserable is not because of your past environment. It is neither because of your lack of capability. It is just that you lack courage. For instance, you lack courage to be happy. In order to be happy, you also need courage to be unloved. When such courage is within you, your relationships will become remarkably and momentarily different. Alfred Adler is one of three most influential psychologists, with Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, where Adler founded the School of Individual Psychology. However, this book also talks about social interest, sense of commitment to community, trust in others, very importantly, self-acceptance, and contribution to others. Adler explains contribution to others as the action in order to truly realize the value of yourself, not doing your best to someone else, sacrificing oneself. Now, what does this have to do with our passage today? Actually, it is for you to figure out through Jesus saving a sinful woman from disgrace into grace and the issue of reverse accusation. As our passage in verse 2 says, at dawn, Jesus appeared again in the temple courts, where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The crowd gathered at dawn. Jesus must have been a very popular teacher, and I guess early morning service didn't start from the Korean churches, but in the temple courts of Jerusalem. Because Jesus was such a popular teacher, the teachers of the law and the Pharisees were jealous and tried to seek an accusation to kill him. Verse 3 says, the teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. I want to emphasize here that this sin cannot be committed alone. So the question arises as to why only one offender was brought in. It is clear that the incident was staged to trap Jesus, and provision had been made for the man to escape. The woman's accusers must have been especially eager to humiliate her, since they could have kept her in private custody while they spoke to Jesus. She probably wasn't even properly clothed either. In verse 4, they say, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery." In this, mere compromise in circumstances were not sufficient evidence, for Jewish law required witnesses to have seen the act. Then verse 5 mentions the law to stone such woman. Here, they altered the law a little. According to Deuteronomy, the manner of execution was not prescribed unless the woman was a betrothed virgin like Mary and Joseph. And the law required the execution of both parties, not just the woman, according to Leviticus and Deuteronomy 22, verses 22 to 24. So we know that they were using this question in verse 5 as a trap. Now, what do you say, Jesus? The trap was that the Romans did not allow the Jews to carry out death sentence. So if Jesus had said to stone her, he could have been in conflict with the Romans, the Roman law. If he had said not to stone her, he could have been accused of being unsupportive of the Jewish law. Now, have you ever been in a similar situation caught between two different cultures and laws? When I was in the US trying to get ordained, the CPM, which stands for Committee for Preparation of Ministry, had asked me, "Now, Sandra, how much Korean and how much American are you?" I guess my answer wasn't too bad since I did get ordained in the US. And if you're curious about my answer, let me tell you in person. Now back to the passage, which says, they were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. Would you like to hear an interesting interpretation of what Jesus might have written? When I was in California, I talked with a man who was in a men's Bible study where they discussed with the members, some of them Hollywood actors, what Jesus might have written here. The answer or the assumption my friend was touched by the most was that Jesus might have written the names of women each man at least lusted after and committed adultery at heart. So Jesus would write on the dust, for example, names like, alphabetically, Anne, Betty, Cindy, Deborah, Erica, Fiona, and so forth, according to each man's past or present. If you have other good suggestions, please let me know. But what Jesus wrote on the dust really is a mystery. In verse 7, when they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." The phrase "without sin" is quite general, and this means without any sin, not without this sin. As Christians, aren't we a lot more generous with sinners who committed the sin I have also, rather than something I have never? When we know of sinners who have committed a different kind of sin than mine, we tend to be a lot more harsh towards them. C.S. Lewis said, "To be a Christian means to forgive the inexcusable in others because God has forgiven the inexcusable in you." When Jesus says, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her," Jesus' answer disarmed them. Since he spoke of throwing a stone, he could not be accused of failing to uphold his patriotic Jewish law. But the qualification for throwing the stone prevented anyone from actual acting of throwing the stone. Verse 9 says, "At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left, with the woman still standing there. They began to go away, and it is because they were not without sin." The older ones went away first means that they were the first ones to realize what was involved. But all the men were either conscience-stricken or afraid, and in the end, only Jesus and the woman remained. The Pharisees tried to condemn the woman and Jesus, but ironically, they get accused, and this is reverse accusation. What wisdom of Jesus handling their trap. Now, who do you think had the most courage to be unloved? Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. How do you think the woman felt? What a marvelous way of Jesus condemning the accusers and declaring his grace. However, Jesus saying, "Go now and leave your life of sin," means that Jesus did not condone what the woman had done. But because what Jesus had said previously was so powerful, I don't think she felt too condemned. The woman remained with Jesus, knowing full well that her sins were obvious. She got to hear the wonderful words, "Neither do I condemn you." This must have been the greatest day in her life. She was guilty. It was no longer possible to make any excuse, and there was no escaping the fact she was caught. It was all in the open. And she receives the verdict from the one that is a judge of heaven and earth. "Neither do I condemn you." And that is Jesus' word to you who come to him today. Neither do I condemn you. No matter what you have done, the things that you have never told anyone, and you hardly have admitted to yourself, the things that you have covered up for so long, what Jesus has to say is, "Neither do I condemn you." These words were not easy for Jesus to say because the wages of sin is death, and there is no escaping it. When Jesus acquitted the woman, he knew that he would have to answer for it with his own life. He acquitted her, but he himself had to pay. He paid for it with his life. He gave his life as a sacrifice for the sins of the world so that he could say to everyone that comes to him, "Neither do I condemn you." Jesus truly had the courage to be hated by the legalists, for he says, "I pass judgment on no one." For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. Jesus is not only the true author of courage to be unloved, but the revolutionist of love, for love, and by love. Amen.